Just shut up your face and get shooting!
Hey guys, Dadtix here, bringing you some more Tiny Tina's Wonderlands info. So, Wonderlands is a spiritual sequel to the Borderlands 2 DLC, Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep, wherein your characters play a game of what's essentially Dungeons and Dragons to help Tina come to terms with Roland's death. The point of difference here is that it's not a Borderlands game, but its own thing. So in this video, I'll be running through some of the differences, including a new attribute system, classes, the overworld, tabletop view, some of the spells and skills, a dual class system, and more. So, the meat of the game won't feature already fleshed out characters, no, instead, you'll be creating your own hero, like you would in a true tabletop game. Customization includes their physical appearance, a first for Gearbox, race, personality, class, and even voice. Senior producer Carla Belmore told GameSpot, "Your voice, your appearance, all that is independent. You get to choose your own voice and some other fun stuff that we can't quite dive into yet, but it goes even into your character's personality, not just aesthetics, and it's all independent. You could look and sound however you want within those set of choices. We don't really tie the player into any one thing, not even every feature is humanoid. You can have shark fins on your head or look like an orc." Creative director Matt Cox adds to this by saying that the character creator is completely separate from your attributes and skills. That means there are no character-specific items in Wonderlands. We want you to be able to express your visuals and your playstyle the way you want. So if you want to be an orc with a fin on their head that shoots ice spells, you can be. Inversely, if you want to be a sickly looking weakling that swings around a heavy melee weapon, you can be as well. Usually when you pick a class in role-playing games, you're locked into their theme, fighters usually being buff or burly and wizards being studious. I foresee players having a lot of individuality when they join together for co-op. This also suggests some items will be locked in other ways, most likely behind attributes, which I'll talk about soon. I'm interested in the class system though. Gearbox has confirmed that there are 6 unique classes to choose from when you make your character, and each of these having their own separate skill trees. The classes aren't revealed yet, but I'll no doubt run through these soon, so be sure to subscribe and drop a like. Belmore goes on to say, "There's 2 different aspects of our character creation. One is aesthetic, where you can choose what you look like, and then there's the character classes. Each character class will have abilities that our fans are accustomed to seeing, and deeper into the game, you'll have the option to multi-class." Cox adds, "You'll choose a primary class, and then later in the main story, you'll be able to slot in a secondary class and mix and match those 2 classes and skill trees. That's your character for the campaign. But once you beat the plot, you'll be able to go back and respec your secondary class. You'll still have to stick with your primary class, but you can try a different secondary." Too many games are going the route of almost consequence-free respecking, making your character choices meaningless and by extension, impersonal. By locking you into the primary class you choose, you have the option of replaying the campaign with a new one, and therefore having a new experience, at least that's what I think. With the ability to add in a secondary to complement your playstyle, there's a lot of potential of customization and combinations. I'm predicting a melee-focused class as well as a rogue and a wizard. There has to be in a game inspired by Dungeons and Dragons. No doubt there will be passive skill synergy between classes. An example might be, increase your damage after you do fire damage in one tree that will complement, say, a convert damage to fire skill in another one. I expect a ton of synergies to customize your character towards. So let's have a quick look at some of the spells and some of the skills that we know of. Might give you a better idea of what to expect with the classes. First is this dark spinning magical glaive of sorts. If you slow down the footage, you see the character controlling where it goes with a flick of his fingers, and the glaive spins to that location, making the pirate skeleton explode with magical energy. The next has the player conjuring a magical bird-like rune out of their hands and firing said magical bird out in typical Borderlands fashion. I figure this to be a class skill from, say, a hunter-like class that prefers the use of dexterity and crossbows. What you might not have noticed is that this spell sucks up enemies out of reach of the character and throws them around. The explosion is from a plant in the background, so don't worry about that. The next is a polymorph spell of sorts, making this land shark a lot more manageable. Well, I assume it's a lot more manageable. This thing could be a killer. Interestingly, your left hand is holding green goop you squeeze to activate the spell. Perhaps not all spells come in tome form. Here's your control spell, freezing these enemies to the ground. The question is, will this always work, or will it require a Dungeons & Dragons-like attribute check to be effective? High wisdom or something in order to keep the freeze effect going for longer. Second, we see a wand in action as well as the right hand, both firing off separate spells, one ice and one fire. Maybe there are combo effects in the game, but right now it's hard to tell. It's a safe assumption to say you press a button and fire off a spell you have equipped. It may be in the form of goop, a book, or a wand from your left hand. Here is a view of the wand being fired, though it's hard to see what it's doing with a teammate firing some green magic at the enemy's side. Here's what looks to be a reloading animation. It's very clever, Gearbox. This deserves the clap. This is most definitely a class skill which confirms a warrior-like class. Whirlwind is a staple in fantasy RPGs, and it's good to see it return. No doubt the damage and elemental types will be based on the main hand weapon you have equipped, and it looks to be doing frost damage. The next spell is a Volcanic Eruption, which looks damn cool. Here we have another seemingly class skill. I'm getting a bit of warlock vibes with this one, casting some kind of dark energy banish or a black hole spell. We don't see the result of it on the Skelly, but it can't be good for him, right? Next is my favorite, the Ice Meteor spell, which just looks over the top and ridiculous, and I love it. I doubt every character would be able to cast things like this, and considering the gun the class has equipped, it's probably a specialized class. Here is most likely another class skill, throwing a kind of Thor's hammer and having it return to you, doing damage on the way there and on the way back. A melee class skill, big fiery hammer that you slam down in front of you, no doubt dealing big AoE damage up close. The final class skill I want to show is this Ethereal Bow of sorts. I can't tell if this is stopping the land shark in its tracks or you're just about to be eaten, but the bow seems cool nevertheless. I mean, this could be a weapon as well, but I think it's more likely something you fire off as a skill. So moving on, to reiterate, you choose the class and then later on complement it with another, which means there are skills you can choose between over two classes, but unlike any Borderlands game before it, you can also gain hero points, which you can spend in a very classic Dungeons & Dragons style attribute system. Cox says, and those all speak to different things, like a melee attribute or a spell attribute or a skill cooldown attribute. It's like a character sheet. Cox mentioned that you'll be able to put hero points into your strength, dexterity, intelligence, wisdom, constitution, and attunement. You can speculate what these are yourself. They're separate from the skill points that you earn throughout the game. Skill points apply to the more traditional skill trees where you can unlock new abilities and perks, and hero points build out your character so they can more easily specialize as a specific class. My assumption is strength will flat out increase damage you do with melee weapons. It can also be assumed that some weapons or spells may have attribute requirements, so if you find a particularly crazy spell, it's probably going to require a high intelligence or wisdom. More than ever, this means we might be seeing a variety in our friends' builds in co-op, making you feel more individual in your choices and letting you share drops around, as one item may not suit you, but may suit your friend. Speaking of drops, Belmore goes on to say, you do have one sort of unique attribute that lives outside of the list of hero stats, and that's luck. And that's something you can affect by completing an endgame challenge. And the luckier you are, the more of this challenge you do, the better your loot chances are at high rarity. So there will be an endgame wherein you'll no doubt be hunting for the best loot and building your luck. The main campaign of Wonderlands takes place immediately after the aforementioned Borderlands 2 DLC Dragon Keep, so Tiny is 13 years old, not 20, and she's back to her more unstable version. Like Dragon Keep, she'll be the dungeon master to the adventure, meaning don't expect anything less than craziness. Belmore says, that's one of the great things about Tina, that chaotic energy. It lends itself well to the idea of a tabletop RPG where you have this unhinged bunker master, and she will obviously shape the world the way she sees fit, which has a huge effect on everything. The story itself is not reactive. It's like Tiny Tina's assault on Dragon Keep, where it's just Tina playing out the plotline. Some of said plotline is played out, as you may have noticed in the trailer, in a third-person tabletop miniatures theme. Yet another thing that differs Wonderlands from Borderlands. It has the side effect of letting you and your co-op buddies appreciate the work you put into your customization. Belmore explains, Belmore. We call it the overworld. So one of the ways you can explore the greater world is through this pulled back third-person view. We have a fairly linear main plot with tons of side missions. In addition, with some exploration, you can find these 5 optional maps that, if you're a tabletop RPG nerd, act like modules. So they are connected to the main story, but they are also their own standalone plots, and the customization you choose actually shows up on your bobblehead character as well. Cox adds, you have dynamic encounters, so you can have a little enemy pop up and then you get transported seamlessly into first-person combat where you do a small fight, get your loot, and pop back out to further explore the entire overworld. So overworld really just acts like, compared to previous games we've done, as the big zone that connects all of the experiences. So it's an overworld experience like you get in RPG, similar to the recent Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, where you use it to travel between destinations, but there will be events that happen in between randomly. Even Mass Effect had the galaxy map which you traverse between locations. A lot of these RPGs do. What is noticeable here is the story will be linear like we want and expect from a Gearbox game, but will have the standard metric ton of side missions. I'm not quite sure what they mean by 5 optional maps, but if they're talking modules, it probably means you can extend the overworld with map sections that have their own story plots and sit outside the main line like DLC content. So it sounds like there are a lot of things that separate Wonderlands from Borderlands, but both devs wanted to assure us that fundamentally, Wonderlands plays like Borderlands, which is fairly obvious in the trailer. It's still a looter shooter, but has more RPG mechanics than ever, and Gearbox are stepping it up to improve the formula. Cox says, we wanted to make sure that we embrace the strength of what we do best, and that looter shooter loop is going to feel very, very familiar to fans of our games. But instead of being preoccupied with how many guns are in the game, our focus is more on the diversity of types of fantasy weapons that you can have. So it's really more about the breadth of fantasy gear rather than ensuring a high tick mark on how many guns we have. We still have our procedurally generated loot, so you'll definitely see different parts on the melee weapons and have different abilities for spell books, but it's more about the new types of gear that you'll be able to combine into a meaningful experience so you can play how you want to play. Belmore adds, and even some things about the guns have changed. You'll see different firing mechanics than you have in previous titles, and the addition of crossbows and magic-based barrels, which are definitely a little bit different from what we've done before. A lot of this is obvious though. Changes needed to be made to suit the theme, including crossbows, bows, magic barrels, and melee weapons. That's something to expect. However, I'm not entirely sure if Matt Cox was insinuating there will be less permutations of weapons total in the game than there was in Borderlands 3. My assumption is he simply meant to say that their focus was on the variety and therefore the actual quality of each weapon, rather than a lot of just random stats on the same ones. The positives here is that they aren't shying away from their procedurally generated loot, and we can see the classic loot explosion during the trailer. In these explosions we see guns, but also melee weapons, wands, spellbooks, and even what could be an anointed glow on this piece of loot right here. If there are anointed weapons, we can expect a lot of skills they could modify, considering we will have access to a lot more skills than we ever had, leading to a ton more customization options. There'll be also changes to movement in Wonderlands. Expect Borderlands 3 slides, ground pounds, vaulting, and faster ground movement, along with a new melee focus mechanic. Cox explains, if you're just out of melee range when you melee attack, you'll glide to your enemy. It's like an auto glide, so you can sprint and slide like in Borderlands 3, and then if you melee at the end of your slide with the right distance of an enemy, you can continue gliding straight into the enemy and close the distance in a really fun way. We can see this mechanic here. It apparently feels quite satisfying to melee, which I'd hope, because if you played other titles that melee in first person, looking at you Elder Scrolls, you know it can feel quite janky. Yes, I know you can pull into third person in those titles, it still feels jank. So Tiny Tina's Wonderlands is scheduled to release for Xbox Series X, S, Xbox One, PS5, PS4, and PC on March 25th. It will come in 3 editions: the Standard, the Next Level, and the Chaotic Great. All 3 will have the same pre-order bonus of the Golden Hero Armor Pack. No idea what that does yet, but it's probably just a cosmetic. The Next Level and the Chaotic come with the Dragon Lord Pack bonus content. Yet again, not sure what this is, as well as next gen optimizations for your consoles. This should, in my opinion, be included in the Standard, and I'm not sure why you'd have to pay more for this. Finally, the Chaotic Great Edition comes with the Season Pass, which includes the Butt Stallion Pack and 4 post-launch content drops. So that's all the information I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Are you excited for Wonderlands? Let me know below. For everything RPG and Wonderlands, keep it right here. Ciao, friends.